that loves to inspire and empower you to awaken your intuitive abilities and develop your psychic skills. I'm your host, Nicole Antoinette. Join me as we dive into exciting topics such as spirit communication, energy healing, intuition, consciousness, and so much more. The fun begins right now. Happy Tuesday, everyone. So excited to have you here for another episode of the Guiding Echoes radio show here on the UPRN network, 105.3 FM New Orleans, or perhaps you are joining us on the Guiding Echoes YouTube channel or Facebook page. And of course, as usual, if you join me there, you will be able to connect with me during the chat. And later on, when we bring in our very special guest, Veronica Lee, you'll have the opportunity to ask her some questions and interact with her as well. So it's going to be a great show. And let's go ahead and get started with the energy of the week. So that's kind of a newer thing I decided to do on the show, where as we begin, we're just going to kind of tune into this week's energy as a collective and see what the universe, what our spirit guides, what our angels all have to say. So immediately as I'm tuning in and asking about the collective, one of the images that I'm getting is a pot of water on a stove. So that doesn't foresee you cooking up meals or cooking up some ramen, although maybe you will. But what I'm getting from this is it feels like this week, and I feel like this is probably going to be closer to Thursday or Friday, you might feel as if you're getting to a boiling point at something. And so when we tune into that energy, when we know that we're getting to the boiling point, that is an indication from spirit that you're going to want to stop, going to want to take a nice deep breath, and you want to kind of refresh your emotions, refresh your mind, and think about what it is that is getting you to that boiling point. And for many of you, I think that this has been a slow procession. What am I trying to say? Anyways, it's been a slow journey to get to this boiling point that you're about to arrive on Thursday or Friday, somewhere around that point. So think about what it is that's bothering you, because you already know what it is. And the truth is, when we are made aware of how our emotions are affecting us. And that's the thing. I think for many of you, you're pushing those emotions down. You don't want to acknowledge that they're there. You don't actually want to get to the boiling point. So you're pretending that you're not angry. You're not frustrated. You're just fine. What? You upset? Nah, ridiculous. But we all know something's bothering you, right? You know it. You feel it. And so what you want to do is you want to be able to address that head on. And this doesn't mean that you have to do it in a way that is sarcastic, or you don't even have to get angry about it, although maybe you're already there. You want to stop and think, okay, what would the best version of me, if I was actually happy right now, if I was healthy, if I was feeling more focused, how might I address this situation? And for many of you, this isn't just a situation. I feel like this is I think for many of you, this is work related. And for some of you, this might be about a relationship. So there is another person involved, or there's a group of people involved. So you want to be able to pull your anger back and kind of, like I said, refresh, reset, and ask yourself, if I was feeling better, how would I approach this? What's the best way for me to speak to this person about what's bothering me? Another thing that you can do is, if you happen to be a fan or a follower of, I want to say John Maxwell, because that's the first person that pops to my head, or someone who's a really good communicator, you can actually put yourself in that person's shoes and be like, all right, well, what would John Maxwell do? What would, I can't remember the guy's name who wrote the 4-Hour Work Week, but he's pretty articulate. He seems like someone who can get his point across pretty well. How would that person confront this situation? And rehearse it in your mind before you actually go through with it. And what I see happening for many of you who take the initiative to do that is, you're not going to get to that boiling point. You're going to be able to avoid that scenario, because if you get to the boiling point, the person that's going to get hurt is you. You're going to end up kind of shooting yourself in the foot. We don't want that. And I do see that whole situation mellowing out. And there might be some compromise, but I think for many of you, I don't see many of you getting what you want out of the situation, but there's at least some type of a resolution. And going about it that way is going to be a lot better than waiting until all of those emotions spill over and you end up getting really upset with yourself. So I hope that that resonates for some of you. So I see Carol saying, I'm grateful for all emotions, they are teachers. And yes, they are. They are definitely teachers. Your emotions give you so much feedback about your inner world and the world around you. And so when our emotions are coming up that way, we definitely want to pay attention. Stacia, I love the hair. Thank you, Stacia. Appreciate that. Remember, if you are listening to us on UPRN 105.3, you are also able to connect with us on the UPRN chat through the Facebook group or through the YouTube channel. And you can also join me on the Guiding Echoes YouTube channel or Facebook page, and you can connect with us on the chat there. And then AJ is saying, I'm so bad at communicating, terrible with words. Well, and that's why rehearsals can actually be really well. And remember, you've got a whole team in spirit that is there to help you with these things. Your spirit guides actually help you through these things. So think about the situation in your mind. Really picture it. Picture the players in it. Who is it that you have to talk to? What is it that you're confronting them on? And ask your spirit guides for the appropriate words. Ask them, like, how should you open the conversation? What questions should you ask? What statements do you need to make? One of the things that I've done in the past is when I've had to confront someone, I'll actually make a list of the different things that I need to talk to them about. Because if I don't do that, I do run the risk of getting into a completely fruitless argument. And that's not the point of that, right? Every argument needs to happen so that information can be exchanged, so people can understand where the other person is coming from, what the problem is, and how to solve it. Unfortunately, in this day and age, most people don't argue to gain information and to gain understanding. They argue because they just want to win. And it's kind of ridiculous sometimes when you have adults acting that way, but we're all guilty of it, myself included. So there you go. So that is the energy for the week. I hope that was helpful. I hope that you guys are able to take that information and create a plan with it. Tammy's saying, I'm at a boiling point. I hold things in for too long. Tammy, I totally empathize with that, because I've been known to do the same thing. I think that for those of us who are recovering people pleasers, I'm just going to raise my hand and call myself out on that one. We do tend to hold our emotions in, right? Because we don't want to make anyone else uncomfortable. We don't want anyone to be upset. We do want to see other people be happy, but a lot of times that comes at the sacrifice of our own well-being, and there's a lesson in that for us as well. So, my guest today is Veronica Lee. She is not only psychic, she's a mystic. She's a fantastic spiritual mentor. I've had the pleasure of knowing Veronica for, I think it's been close to 10 years. It's been quite a while. She has been featured in Om Times magazine, where she's also written quite a few articles. And we're going to bring her on to this show right now. So, Veronica, welcome.
Thanks, Nicole. Good to see you.
It's good to see you too. So you're looking good today. Loving the makeup, loving the long hair. Everything's looking good.
Thanks. Just had to do a little bit of mascara so that my eyes at least popped right through the glasses.
Right. Very important. You can't leave home without mascara or lipstick. That is every woman's rule.
Exactly.
And if it's not, it should be. So anyways, welcome to the show, and tell people a little bit more about what it is that you do, because you're not just psychic. You're also, I want to say, you're a pioneer in the spiritual world. Like, I really believe you are. You have this amazing gift at channeling, at tuning in, at getting to the root of the problem, and not just giving people information on what's going on with their lives and what's, most people go to psychics because they want to know what's in their future, and that's fine, but you give people tools to maneuver through whatever it is that they're going through. So tell us more about this, the whole package that is Veronica Lee. I want to know.
Yeah, that's an interesting package. So First of all, I was raised with all things weird. My mom got into metaphysics when I was about 3 years old. And so I was going to all of her woo-woo classes with her spiritual teacher and holding my hands over people. So all things really crazy like this that now are becoming more popular were really part of my foundation. And I'm 55 now. So I've been doing this a long time. In terms of working specifically as an intuitive and spiritual mentor, that's been over 15 years. And the reason I started to move into this, realm and actually do this professionally rather than just being a mom, which is what I wanted, or being an interior designer, which is what I went to school for, I really found myself in a crisis. And it's often through crisis that we sort of find ourselves.
Sure.
And in that crisis point, it was sort of like, okay, this is really what I'm supposed to be doing. And reading people is only part of it. Like you said, it's holding space for them to become who they are is not as easy to articulate in terms of, oh, here's how I do it and here's what it looks like, because I work very organically. Yeah. There are two main ways that I work. First of all is I do readings, and they are generally working with the Akashic Records. And a lot of people think of the Akashic Records as sort of past lives, right? I don't see it so much as past lives as I do seeing it as connecting in with your soul, connecting in with this huge energy field of who you are. So really working in these really high vibrations. And I also do work as a spiritual mentor. And what that means is basically allowing people to be seen on these really deep levels, and to hold space for them to emerge into, being who they're here to be. So it's not like I said, it's not like a checklist, like, oh, you want to get from, this point, and here's your specific goal, and I'm going to teach you how to manifest that. It's really, I look at your system, your being, your whole energy system, and it's like, oh, here's what's going on, and here's your next step toward unfoldment. So I hope that helps a little bit, but it is a little tricky to try to explain.
Right, absolutely. And so are you finding, so you mentioned something earlier that was interesting to me. You talked about people connecting to their souls. Over the last 2 years, I feel like people have been disconnecting from their souls as a way of escaping this reality and all the weirdness that we've been going through over the past 2 years. So I'm curious to know what have you noticed about that? Because what have you noticed about the energies, the consciousness of people? How is all that how's that been at play over the last 2 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. So like you, I actually do a weekly transformational forecast on my YouTube channel. And so what you were saying this week was very similar to what I was saying yesterday. I bring it every Monday. And really what I'm seeing is that we have been awakening for a long time. I mean, if you go back to when I was a kid, we were talking about the age of Aquarius, right? It was this, interesting phenomena that was coming onto the planet. And we were like waking up to that. But that's a long journey, right? And what I'm seeing is that there are people who've come in highly awake and who really plan to make a shift in consciousness for themselves and for the planet. And what's happening is, as they sort of step away from that, as they try to sort of deny who they are and what they're here to be, that's when more and more crises start to happen, right? So it may be that, yes, they want to try to, numb themselves down with drugs, or they might try to, run away from who they're here to be, or they might use some defensive mechanisms like you were talking about at the beginning around, picking a fight to win rather than learning how to communicate so they can really expand and open their heart. They may do all those, but who's ultimately going to pay are themselves, right? Because even if you want to resist your own growth, your soul is going to say, I remember the contract that you made before you came in, and I'm going to hold you to that. And that's challenging, right? That's really challenging, to be held accountable to those soul contracts, to this integrity of being the best version of ourselves, of really stepping into our truth, our power, and our joy.
So a lot of people come here and they don't know what their contract is. So many people feel lost when it comes to their life in general. And there's for the past at least 20 years, there's been a big push for people to live their life purpose. And we've seen that in religious organizations too. But there's plenty of people I speak to, and they're like, I have no idea what my purpose is. So if we come to earth not remembering what the contract is, and maybe people don't feel like they have access to the Akashic records on their own, how can they remember what that contract is? How can they tune into that?
Yeah, great question. The number one thing, and I actually did write an article for Times on this, it's really recognizing that the soul purpose, and I'll use the word SOLE rather than SOUL, is to align with joy, to align with this high frequency of pure joy. And a lot of people think, but we can't be happy all the time. And are we here just to chase those things that we want and to, fulfill those, desires? No, not in the really, kind of lower vibration way or the needy way, but in essence, to let go of our defenses, to let go of our shoulds that say, no, you can't have too much fun, or you can't be in too much joy, or you must have crisis in order to learn. The more we allow ourselves to experience these frequencies of joy, we recognize that's us. Yeah. And so when we start to lean into that, it resonates more, right? And we start to find that. So what I often recommend to people is start to feel into those things that make your heart sing. I mean, it sounds very cliche and kind of Marie Kondo-ish, but it really is. It's like, what makes your heart sing? There's a difference between an addiction and like doing something to numb out, or overdoing something because you think it gives you a little pleasure for a little while. But joy can come from basically anything in which you are in your center, in which you are really present to this moment and feeling, this profound sense of peace. Mm-hmm. And that will help indicate the direction. That being said, there are many of us who came in, let's say, to help humanity shift into higher levels of consciousness. And again, that's going to show up if you are attracted to the healing arts, if you want to serve in some way, if you feel like, oh, I really like this Reiki and I want to take the next level and I want to help someone, whatever it is. So what I'm seeing is that people who are interested in this whole realm of consciousness are often going to be those ones who are the change makers and the healers that are ready to take that next step. For everyone else, again, why not be in this place of joy and learning how to lean into that which brings you that joy? And I've said this before, I've been saying this for a long time. If for one moment on earth, every human being did something that brought them pure bliss, pure joy, in that moment, we would have peace on earth. Yeah. Now imagine if we just, did the next moment and the next moment and learned how to be in that frequency.
That would be really powerful. In fact, I want to invite everyone listening to this to just take a deep breath and smile and think of your happiest memory. And that's as simple as it can be sometimes, is just tuning in to that memory. You don't even have to do anything. Just breathe, just focus on your breath, get in tuned with that memory that still makes your heart sing. It can be of a favorite Christmas. It could be of a puppy. It can be of the first time you hold your child in your hands and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I made this. And that's one way you can start bringing up those vibrations of joy. So another question I would have for you is, now, there are people who aren't numbing themselves out on purpose. They don't mean to shut down their emotions. They're feeling depressed. They've been through all these different experiences around them where that wall just kind of start building, and it's almost, and it is absolutely a trauma response, right? The whole world's been through trauma for the past couple years, worldwide trauma. So for people who are having a hard time connecting with joy, where the music that they listen to doesn't really bring them excitement anymore, and the type of books they used to read just don't do anything for them, how can people start making that shift, even in small ways, if right now they feel as if they don't have access to those emotions?
That is an excellent question. There are a couple of things going on collectively. So when I was talking about people who've come in to really anchor in this higher realm of consciousness into our human beings, part of that process is we came in highly awake, highly connected. You're talking the upper chakras, right? Then we're starting to move down, and maybe we're going to awaken our third eye, and we're going to start to have the sense of like, oh, I'm fairly intuitive there. And then, maybe we start to learn to speak our truth. Now, what's happening collectively is we are starting to go down from these higher, connections, which feel really good and yay, into the nitty gritty hard stuff, the human stuff. And in general, years ago, I was seeing people really connecting in, coming into their throat and in their heart, just really opening that up. Now where most people are collectively is around the third chakra, really getting a sense of identity. And part of that forming of that identity is deciding or figuring out what you're not. Right. Well, the same is true for, let's say, moving towards this joy or towards this perhaps, connection to what might be there, or these shifting away from the depression and things like that. First of all, it's going to be acknowledging that you probably have some kind of trauma, right? So we do need to process our trauma, whether we do that through a qualified therapist or whether we do that through, I love the work of Gabor Mate, or any of the other people who are really understanding the vagal nerve and how it's really impacting, the trauma in their body. So collectively, we are starting to come into the trauma aspect. So it's not just you, but more and more tools are available for you. So you're not alone in it, but there are more people who are qualified and who are addressing this. But the other part of it is to start to step away from those unsupportive patterns, right? And when I say unsupportive patterns, that would include people. So, if you're around people who make you feel like crap a lot, right? It's not about blame, because you don't want to go into blame. They're doing this to me and they're, whatever, because that just really keeps you in victim mode. But recognizing that it's not, again, this person has to make me happy. We're responsible for our own joy. But if that person's energy makes you feel like crap from after being around them, then it's like, okay, I want to spend less and less time with this person. The same is true for environments. The same is true for work. The same is true for media. So it's starting to unplug from those things that aren't resonating, that don't bring us joy, as best we can, because a lot of times we're going to say, oh, but I have to have a job. Yeah, you do. But how do you start to navigate away from a job that you really don't like towards something that really does bring you joy? So if you're doing a job that you have to do 9 to 5 and it's paying the bills, great. What are you doing with your off time that helps balance that out? So it's disconnecting from the things that aren't serving and starting to look toward the things that might serve, that might bring you joy. It's this idea of experimentation and playing versus finding it, right? Finding it has a little stress behind it, and that doesn't bring joy.
Right. Yeah. And I love the idea of playing to find it, playing around with things. And I think that and that's the thing, is like the words that people use when they talk to themselves also defines what their experience is going to be, because words are so important. And the way that people talk to themselves can help them to reclaim their soul's power, which brings me into my next question. So you actually have a workshop coming up, or is it an online course?
It's a little bit of both. So basically, It's an online course that starts September 1st, and it's a daily content drip that helps you realign with who you've come here to be, to reclaim your soul power. And infused in that 30-day, drip, and it's, obviously you can go at your own pace. I offer 7 Q&As plus a welcoming, onboarding, video on the very first day throughout the process, so that you are able to be guided. It's like, okay, here's, it's like we're all meeting at a checkpoint. I give you your maps. Each day you get to that next checkpoint, and then we come back together after 4 or so days to say, how's it going? What questions do you have? What came up for you? And I help you navigate your way through this journey. And of course, it's not like, fully inclusive, and at the end of this 30 days, you're going to be completely, transformed, knowing your soul purpose. what I represent and what I'm so adamant about is that we all want those quick fixes. That's why we also want to dull down, right? Because we're not getting those quick fixes. What I see is it doesn't have to be hard work. It doesn't have to be miserable, but it is about coming into who we are, which isn't necessarily easy. It can be painful. It can bring up things that we don't want to feel. But at the same time, it's like, okay, you can keep avoiding it, but how many more years are you going to cause yourself misery for that? Or how many more lifetimes are you going to repeat the patterns until you finally let go of this belief that somehow you're not worthy, right? So it's really helping you, this course that I'm offering, remember your worthiness and start to, kind of rekindle the joys that are within you and start to awaken those inherent spiritual gifts. So it just works our way through the process of this sweet awakening and playfulness to rediscover who you are and to reclaim your soul power.
That's beautiful. It sounds like a very, very powerful course. So I do want to go ahead and turn this over to our chat room so you can answer questions, because I know people are going to have more questions about soul purpose, and maybe throw in a couple psychic questions in there if people have those, because people always have psychic questions. There's always questions that, that people would love for psychics to answer for them. So as we're waiting for those to come through, tell me more about, like, you were talking about finding your joy. And I'm just curious to know, like, what are some of the things that bring you joy personally? Like, what makes your heart sing?
Yeah, this is, my fundamental thing is my family, my children. When I was little, there were two things I really liked. First of all, it was anything, occult, metaphysical related. So I literally had a black cat named Familiar. I was like a witch, for Halloween. I don't know how many times, or I was, a little fortune teller. I actually had, at the time, it wasn't real crystal, but I have a so-called crystal ball. I used to, wish for every single birthday, I wish I had magical powers. My favorite show was Bewitched. So that whole realm was always like my passion and my interest. But more than that, I wanted to be a mom. And I am an only child, and my mom took in a lot of my cousins and fostered them, throughout my growing up. And I loved having these little playmates and siblings for a little while, but they'd always have to go home, they'd always go back to their parents, which is good, right? But with me, I'm like, I want lots of kids. And so anyway, I ended up having 4 children, and they are, my life, my world. And when I had my oldest, who's now 28, it was sort of like, yay, I'm finally fulfilling this purpose, right? And, subsequently, after, 2 and then 3 and 4 came along, it just consumed me in a way that was just filled me up. It was difficult. I did everything sort of, not traditionally. I had a family bed. I chose to put them in a Waldorf school. So everything I did was ultra conscious, which in essence is a lot of work, but it was what brought me joy. And it was hard work. And yet my family still brings me joy. And if I were to start to now talk about little things I like to do, I like to do handcrafts and such. So I like to knit. I like to do macrame. I like to do some crochet. So, a lot of things like that. I enjoy being in nature. I enjoy gardening. So those are the things that are sort of in order, if I were to say, in terms of the yay to, the little hobbies and such.
But even those things like knitting and gardening are very meditative, though. I find that a lot of times when I'm knitting, or even just listening to my favorite music, or heck, taking a shower, that seems to be when some of my best ideas come to me.
Absolutely. And I'm really enjoying, I just made a dream catcher this week, and I love
Fun.
the pattern of the dream catcher. It basically, becomes like a lotus, right? And then you get to put little crystals in the middle if you wish. And yeah, there's just this beautiful, I love patterns. And I think that's what also makes me a good reader, is I see patterns. I love patterns. I see how things are related. And I do think it's all related, and in the Waldorf school, they teach children how to knit in first grade and in second grade. And I actually teach children how to knit. I do that a couple of days a week. I work at the local Waldorf school, and I love to see children, like getting it, to understand like, oh, this is working, and to see them take this, one strand and turn it into a fabric and to understand how it works. And it really helps develop the brain. It helps their hands develop, which also is, related to the brain. And I just love that whole process. So working with children, even not my own, is still something that brings me a lot of joy, and especially when it's married to crafts.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a good life skill for kids to be learning anyhow. And it's sad that that's, simple things like cooking and balancing a checkbook. They don't
Yes.
use checkbooks anymore, but it's not taught in schools anymore. It's kind of scary. All right. So we have a question coming in from Jackie, and she says, I've been walking around with a constant state of fog. What can I do about that?
Yes. Do you want me to answer that, Jackie?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So what I'm looking at is, first of all, I'm seeing a lot of energy around the heart. So it feels like there's some grief there, and that basically what I'm seeing is for the past 4 or 5 years, you've really struggled with sort of your own identity and what you really want. And in so doing, you're trying to break away from what you used to have and what you believe should be, and your obligations to, say, family and shoulds. And you really want to break through that, but there's so much fear. And because of that, it's like, I don't know what to do. And so then it feels like you're in this holding pattern, and then therefore is this fog, which is sort of this in-between state, or kind of a dulled out state in and of itself. It's that state of indecision and of powerlessness, right? Not that you are powerless, it's that you're allowing yourself to believe that you're powerless to change your situation. So I hope that helps, Jackie. If you have a follow-up question, then that's fine, but that's the picture I was seeing.
All right. And I'm wondering, I know that you said that you gave a similar message that I did to the collective, but I'm just kind of wondering what other messages are you picking up on generically this week?
Yeah. So what I saw was this week, it's like we've moved into Leo. I'm not an astrologer, but I do like astrology, to some degree. And Leo is just very outward, very exciting. And plus we're in summer in the Northern Hemisphere. And so it's like, yeah, I want to stay up late. But we're sort of pushing the edge a little bit, and we're getting worn down. So whether it's we're staying up too late, or we've eaten too much fair food. And that was my analogy, when you're at the fair and there's so much fun, but then you overall kind of go, everything just doesn't work. It's like my stomach's upset. I shouldn't have had that, cotton candy just before that ride, that kind of thing. So we're sort of pushing ourselves unconsciously. And like you were saying, it's like, okay, what would I do if I were being my best version of myself? So I'm seeing that. I am seeing a lot of people hitting the lower chakras. So not just the third, but into the second, where this is where a lot of our emotions, do live. And there's so much fear around that. There's so much fear in being in our emotions and really being tender with them. It's almost like we think either if I touch him, I won't ever stop crying. I'll just cry and cry and cry, and I'll never, and the pain is too great. How could I handle this? But rather to just sort of maybe take little bite-sized pieces of them and go, okay, what does this little tiny pinky feel like of my emotions? And kind of breathe into that and feel into that. It's like, okay, I feel some grief. I'm feeling some sadness. Okay, let one tear fall. And then just going to take a deep breath and say, okay, and in another hour, maybe I'll feel and allow for that next tear. So it doesn't have to be go in there and rip it all open, but there's this tenderness and this self-compassion in our approach, but denying it isn't working, right? And so I think that that's really going to be the challenge, and it's going to continue to cause depression for people if they keep trying to bounce out of their emotions, out of their uncomfortable emotions, right?
Yeah. Well, and I'm just curious, I'm going to put this out to the chat and everyone listening to us live. I'm curious to know if everyone else felt a sense of heaviness over this past weekend, because I know I did. Like over the weekend, it hit me probably around Saturday afternoon, just this heaviness. And I couldn't stop crying until probably Sunday around 5 p.m. And, I knew what part of it was. Like part of it I could identify with, like, okay, I'm missing this and I'm feeling heartbreak over this. And so some of it made sense, but I also know some of it's healed and some of it's been moving forward. And so there was the rest of it where it was just like, I don't know where this is coming from exactly. And so, as I was talking to a friend of mine, she was feeling the same way. And as we were talking, we are like, this has to be collective energy. And as I'm looking through the chat, a lot of people are saying, yes, absolutely, for sure. I was drained and exhausted. And so that's another thing to keep in mind, is that, your life can be going good, and we are all collectively connected. And so we can pick up on those emotions from each other. So what is it when that happens, like from your perspective, and when you're looking at energy and you see people who are happy, but they're empathic, and they start to pull in those emotions and they start crying really on behalf of others, like what is the purpose of that?
Yeah. I'm going to say a couple of things to this. I cried pretty much all of Saturday. I was crying all this morning, so I had to do my makeup so I could, do this. But for me, there's a tender point where we are right now. And for me, I lost my husband on July 24th, 4 years ago. And I lost my mom August 3rd, which is tomorrow, 4 years ago. So I lost them within a 10-day period. So in this, week and a half time period, I'm hitting some really, big stuff. But what I will also say is that we have spent, let's just look at the whole picture for a minute, many of our years, many of our eons, decades, whatever you want to call it, avoiding uncomfortable emotions, right?
Yeah.
The only uncomfortable emotion that we allow ourselves to feel is rage. Men more so than women.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this acting out, right? It's like, okay, let's shoot up a school. Let's beat somebody up. Let's, call them out and troll somebody and call them names, right? Because it's like it feels empowering, but it's a false feeling of empowerment, right? Because what we're trying to do is gain power over this uncomfortable feeling, and we want to overpower others so that we don't feel so bad. But the reality is that we are human, tender, multifaceted, empathetic beings, right? And we are really trying to heal. And when I say heal, it doesn't mean go and erase and fix something. What I mean is heal this belief that somehow having emotions makes us wrong or bad or flawed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things we're going to have to get used to, whether we want to or not, is feeling these emotions, whether they are ours or somebody else's. Now, I'm going to give you a picture of this empathetic piece. So the thing about being an empath is that we are all born mostly, just like I was taught from the time I was a child, that we're all psychic, right? It's just, what is your particular gift, and are you developing it? Are you practicing it? Well, if you think about children, one baby will cry in a store and the other will set off all the other little babies and children crying, right, out of empathy. So that is a natural state. And what happens is that if you've got a whole, collective suppressing their emotions, and a lot of this grief and sadness and feelings of unworthiness, it has to go somewhere. And those who are starting to open up to who they are, open up their gifts more and get in tune with them, are going to go, whoa, I'm feeling this. And so a lot of times what we're feeling as empaths isn't just ours. It's impounded and compounded and impacted by everybody else's too, by this collective seething or, pool of heaviness. One thing is important to recognize is that, yes, yours is in there too. And the other is that what isn't yours isn't your responsibility. So once you can start to recognize, wait a minute, this isn't really mine. And so you can then learn tools to give it back to these higher realms of consciousness, give it to the people's angels. Like if you have a roommate who's not real happy, it's like, that's not my job to fix them and to carry their stuff. Let their angels handle it. Let their guides handle it. This is between them and their higher selves, right? Easier said than done, but there are tools to be able to do that. And then the other is to really take responsibility and start to work through our own stuff, because when we do, then the rest of it it doesn't feel so heavy. It's like, because when we start to clear out our own stuff, we're not drawing in all the heaviness from everybody else, if that makes sense, because it's sort of that like attracts like. So when we start to be more clear, it doesn't impact us the same way.
Right. Well, and the other thing too is when we're able to take care of our own emotions, I think, and really get into them and dive into them and pull them apart, we are giving ourselves permission and the power to transmute our own energy and start to shift it. And when we're able to start doing that for ourselves, we're able to start doing that for the collective too, I believe. And so when we start feeling these uncomfortable emotions of sadness and heaviness and pain, first, I think it's important to remember that it's funneling through us, not because we're being punished or anything like that. Because I know empaths all the time, they're like, this is a curse. And it's like, can understand why you would say that. It definitely feels that way sometimes. But it's really, we're kind of all these different, instead of water filters, we're emotional filters, and we're helping people filter that out. And so being able to notice when we're receiving that information and either shooting it up to the heavens or shooting it out down the ground, either way it's going to get transmuted, is going to be very helpful. But I think what empaths forget, and what I forget, and what I'm trying to get better at, is you can send energy back that's helpful, that's happy, that's pleasant, that's blissful even. And so by being able to sit with those emotions and see, what's coming up, like I said, over the weekend, I could identify some sad things that I was feeling sad about, but then the rest of it was like, I don't know why I'm feeling this. None of this makes sense. This is just, nervous system trauma response, and I couldn't figure out what. But then when I was able to like cry, because I was like crying almost nonstop over the weekend, and I finally got to that point where I was cried out and I could relax, I just kind of closed my eyes and I visualized a pink light, because I love visualizing the pink light. And I just started sending that out to whoever needed it. And I was just like, I trust that this is going to find its home. Like, I trust this is going to go where it needs to be. So, and that's just something I want to put out there, is like, as an empath and as people who are feeling all these emotions, you don't have to stay stuck in it. You're not helpless, and you can do something about it. And first you have to, like Veronica was saying, work through your own crap, work through your own emotions, work through your own trauma. And when you're able to do that, it becomes so much easier to send out those good vibes to other people. But it really does. But all of this at its foundation, it's about not just feeling worthy, but I think loving yourself.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think that sometimes to get to that point of loving ourselves has to start with this awareness of our worthiness, right? Mm-hmm. It's sort of like, if we're not worthy, why would we love ourselves? Yeah. And one of the things that I've seen, just how I've seen that, we've come in to really transform, and we want to, kind of make this collective shift, and we came in to do this. One thing I've seen that basically every human has agreed to, besides gravity, it's like, yeah, I'm going to incarnate on this earth planet.
And air.
Yeah. And having, human skin and all of these things right. that are part of being human. There was another piece, probably written really tiny, and we just thought, oh, what's the big deal? We agreed to some level in belief in unworthiness, because that's the collective shift that we wanted to make, right? We wanted to somehow believe in this unworthiness, and then we happened to pick parents who were going to really pound that word unworthiness in, right? By telling us certain things about ourselves, by neglecting us, whatever the story is, then we'd really believe the unworthiness, because it would be in our DNA now. And then the game, or the, transmutation, is to start to shift that fundamental belief and that, untruth back into the recognition that you are absolutely worthy, and that you are perfect as you are right now. Nothing to do, fix, heal, or change, but to lean into that perfection that you already are, right? And that's the practice, right? And it's going to be, some work to do. And yet, why wouldn't we, right? Why wouldn't we go, yeah, I'm ready to start to embrace my worthiness?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So, just want to go ahead and put this message here from Tasha from the chat. And she's saying, yes, on point. I've been suppressing my feelings and just been going through the motions of life and not living life since my love's passing 2 years ago. And I can't seem to get out of this place.
Yeah.
And I think another thing to address is you talked about, Veronica, the loss that you faced just 4 years ago. And the older you get, the closer the years are. By that I mean, like, 2 years ago doesn't seem that long ago. 4 years ago, when you're a teenager, 4 years ago is forever ago. As an adult, 4 years ago is as close as yesterday. So there's a difference between feeling that grief and going through the motions of grief and depression. I think, and I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me, but that's okay. I think depression can be easier to turn around than grief. What do you think?
It's hard. I think that if we feel into the depression, there probably is a sense of grief in there, right?
Sure.
That it's sort of like the grief of not being connected to ourselves, not being connected to our joy, not being connected to our heart, right? And so that is a grief in and of itself. And if we think about grief from this perspective, and I'm not going to even try to, justify and say, oh, well, this grief is worse than this, because we can all kind of have our own little scale of things. Like, yes, I lost my husband. Yes, I lost my mother. They were my foundation, these two people. I was with my husband for over 30 years, right? And at the same time, losing a child is unimaginable to me, right? And so it's and we're all so different. But one of the things with this grief piece is when we took that very first breath, when we were incarnated, we suddenly had lost the ability to just breathe in the amniotic fluid with air or without air, right? And there was ease there. There was grace. We didn't have to do anything. All our needs were met. And as soon as we incarnated, it's like, there's this struggle, right? And there's this feeling of, I'm no longer connected. And then there's a literal cutting off of that connection to source, to mother, but also on a psychic level, this disconnection from source, right? Consciousness. And that's got to spark on some level this tinge of grief, right? And each time that our parents looked away and didn't look in our eyes, or each time that we had to cry it out, or each time that a friend might have hurt our feelings, that's grief, right? And so you add layers and layers of that. And again, it's not like, oh, everybody else is to blame. It's like, oh, this is the part of being human, that we get to have all of these feelings and we get to be even confused by them all, but they just sort of, work their way into sort of the underground, right? Because we may not even recognize at that young of an age how to process them, right? And the last, person who made a comment said something about, that going through the motions. Well, emotions are when you're, the energy of the feelings are in motion. And so, it's like, how do you let that move? And crying and not being able to, let's say, get over some kind of grief is letting that emotion, letting that energy move, right? So in other words, it may be 10 years, it may be, 20 years that grief may still trigger something, and you may still have an emotion. It's like, okay, here it is again. And if you could welcome that moment, it just, again, it's that honoring of all. And sometimes that's part of why, if somebody has a loss, it may be so difficult, because of all the other little mini griefs that have been there and not moved.
Right. Yeah. So it's all those different pieces of trauma and those things that we lost, and it just adds up. So instead of having just one big event that we can point to, it's a little harder, because it's all these little things, like the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Exactly. And one of the things, when my daughter was in a preschool, she was like a year and a half, and I thought it was a really awesome program. It was through UC Davis, the human development program there. And so she was in this little preschool, and the teachers of the preschool were students of UC Davis human development. So it was sort of like a experimental, live, interactive, class.
Right.
And one of the things they didn't do is they didn't project onto the children, right? They would just witness. I see tears. I see tears. They're just, and we didn't get that. Most of us did not get that from our parents, even with my mom, who was ultra conscious, she was kind of emotionally afraid of her emotions, even though she would be willing to hold me and say, you seem really sad. Is there anything you want to talk about? And she was there for me. Part of what I picked up, because we are such empaths, and also you learn more from modeling than you actually do from, interactions.
Absolutely.
There was a part of me that said, oh, she's not safe in her emotions. So I may be able to feel okay by telling her some things, but I'm going to hold on to these emotions because these are the ones we don't talk about, because that's what I'm noticing she's doing. Right.
Yeah.
So it's again, it's not to blame anybody. It's just this pattern, this process of not having the tools. And as adults, we get to go out and learn some of these tools, and they're not as difficult as we think. And like I said earlier, there are so many people right now that are really addressing trauma. Wow, what a perfect time as we move into these deeper, we haven't even hit, collectively the second chakra or the first. When we get to that, it's not going to look or feel good at all. I'm not predicting anything, but I am. It's not going to be pretty. So you better kind of be, ready and have some tools, handy.
Yeah. And to get to that first chakra, just to kind of play on that a little bit more, I've been talking to a lot of psychics over the last week, and they're all saying there's another wave of something coming. Like, everyone feels it.
Absolutely.
Everyone feels it. And I think that's what like last weekend was partly about, but everyone's just like, it's like we're all on edge, like, oh God, what is it going to be this time? Like, we all know it's coming.
Yes.
So for those of you listening, if you've been feeling like something's coming and you're trying not to be pessimistic, but you're feeling like something's coming, I want you to know, validated, we're all feeling it. You're not going crazy. It is an actual thing. Okay, so our next question comes from Sherry, and so she's asking, do you know if there's something I need to work on to bring my ability to a forefront and be able to control it? That's a great question.
Yes, it is a good question. So what I'm seeing, Sherry, is that you are an empath, a lot of energy in the heart, and that's scary, right? Because it's like, oh my gosh, it's too close to all that I can feel. I don't know what to do with this. It's not about controlling it. It's not about controlling it. It's about learning to work with it. Right. Mm-hmm. So the thing, as soon as we start wanting to control something, what does it want to do? It wants to like break out. Like anytime anybody wants to control us, we're like, I'm out of here. Right. Same with any of our own natural gifts. It's like, don't you dare try to control me. You've been suppressing me for too long. I'm ready to break free here. So it's really about practice. So maybe looking for classes, looking for mentors, looking for opportunities in which you can practice and learn tools. Together, my mom and I were teaching intuitive skills for many years, and the foundation of any intuitive skill is going to be grounding. Do you know how to ground? Right? Centering, do you know how to come into your center? But because before I read anybody else, I have to really be here. I have to be right here and present. And then the word shielding, it's not because, oh my gosh, the world is so bad and there might be some demons coming in. No, right. Shielding is just like, this is my space, and I'm only going to read your space, but I don't need to take it into my system. Right. And then I talk about opening up that channel so that the information comes a lot easier. So with you, Sherry, what I'm seeing is that, you're also coming into that third chakra, really coming into who you are. But what I'm also seeing is there's a fear that people are going to judge you, and that's really the work. So it's developing it. But what's the point in developing it if you're hiding it at the same time and you're shamed and you are scared, right? So that needs to be sort of addressed and looked at is, what are people going to think of me? Or, just making sure that you are, that you are letting go of any shame associated with your gifts and with yourself and with your abilities. So I hope that helps.
All right. And we have a beautiful comment from CF. She's saying, I have found that sharing tears is hard because it's hard for whoever is with me. I love that she was conscious enough to notice that. That's beautiful. And I think that's true for a lot of us. She goes on to say, I finally got to where I just tell them it's okay. It's love.
Absolutely.
That's very
beautiful.
That's beautiful. And then Sherry's also responding to what you just said. She's like, I've been called the devil. Welcome to the club, Sherry. Welcome to the club. I promise you, it's fine if they want to call you that, because we play with magic. We're manifestors. We're psychics. Oh my gosh, it's so much fun. So you know what? Let the haters call you that. They just jelly. They're just jealous.
And it's their belief system. And the thing is, it only is going to trigger you if you buy into it, right? Sure, we all want to be loved. Nobody wants to be hated on. But it's sort of like if there's something in you that worries, am I the devil? Is this wrong? That, if there's any kind of doubt that you're somehow bad, and that's what I was saying about the shame, it's releasing that shame, because you're otherwise it's just going to kind of like hold on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, we always want to be careful that we're not allowing other people's projections to tell us who we are.
Absolutely.
And I think that's hard for all of us. So, that's one of the things that's kind of fun about this life that we're in is, yeah, it has its ups and downs, but ultimately we get to decide who we are. Yeah, so let's see. Christine Gray, I went to Reiki and my mother-in-law told me I was into devil stuff. Well, this is coming up a lot. So someone else is saying my brother calls it black magic. So, we only have a few minutes left, but let's talk about this fear factor a little bit. Like, why is there such a strong fear factor still? It seems like people are becoming more conscious. And so it blows my mind when we still have this.
Yes. So I'm just going to kind of put this out there, and this isn't to blame anybody. This isn't to say anything wrong, but A, I live in California. B, I grew up with this, right? And when I was about, I would say 4th or 5th grade, one child said to me, you don't go to church, you're going to go to hell. And I'm like, really? Like I hadn't even like that. It just wasn't part of my consciousness.
Right.
I've had maybe one other person on my YouTube say something like, you're worshiping too many icons. I just hit delete. That's not part of my consciousness, right? So the question really comes into what is in you that is allowing this to be in your field. So I'm not, again, going into blame. It's just really being super honest with saying, who am I associating with? Why is this coming up for me and triggering me, right? Because once you can identify that, you can complete it, and then it won't be an issue anymore. Does that make sense? So it's really about going, like my mother-in-law, for example, pretty traditional, she didn't ever call me a devil. She would just be like, yeah, that's kind of interesting. We literally did, my mom was interested in all kinds of things, including ritual. And so my daughter, who's 28, she had a little baby blessing, and my mother had everybody like touch their chakras. I'm like, not the root chakra, Mom, please. My mother-in-law doesn't want to touch her root chakra, but she accommodated. But the point being is that my heart was so open, and my mother-in-law loved me, that on her husband's departure, she's later on asked me, how is he doing? And it's just like, so there was just a little bit of fear, but it was never, I was never cast aside. So really start to recognize you get to own you, and nobody else gets to impact that.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Veronica, thank you so much for spending your time with us today and sharing your knowledge with us. We all appreciate that so much. And for people who want to learn more about you, get a reading from you, or sign up for your new course and mentorship, how can they contact you?
Yeah, great question. So on pretty much all the social media channels, which I don't go on them all, but I still have accounts for most of them, and I do get notifications. It's at Veronica Lee TV. And that's my website also, veronicalee.tv. And on the very front page, you'll see that I have a monthly special. I mentioned that Reclaim Your Soul Power that I'm offering in September. But if you get a reading that's $100 or more, anything that you buy that's $100 or more, you automatically get that course. Excuse me. Or if you just want the course, it's only $44. But all the information is on my website, including all of my articles that I wrote for Times, and so much more, videos, etc. Lots of resources to really support you in your own awakening.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again so much for joining us. It was such a pleasure to have you. And again, guys, go be sure that you follow Veronica on Facebook, on YouTube. She does her weekly weekly forecast where she does look into the energy of the week. And I love watching those from different psychics because everyone has a different way of explaining it. And then, of course, everyone has different layers of understanding. And it's just always fascinating to me to see what people tune into. So, absolutely fascinating, good stuff. So, all right, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. We've got some great shows for you on the UPRN network today. Also, wanted to let you know and rather invite you to my psychic party that I'm hosting on my YouTube and Facebook page at Guiding Echoes on the psychic parties at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. It's exactly what it sounds like. We eat cake and ice cream. We connect with source. We give you messages from beyond. I can't get to everyone. I get to as many people as I can. So I want to invite you for that. Again, thank you for watching. Be blessed. We will see you next Tuesday with another awesome show. And coming up next is more goodness on the UPRN network.